I walked through the front door of my childhood home, exhausted from my shift at the grocery store. At 19, I was saving every penny for college while living with my parents and helping with household expenses. The screaming hit me like a wall. "Where is it?" Mom's voice echoed through the house, shrill and angry. "Where did you hide the money?" I dropped my backpack and hurried toward the living room, where I found my parents standing over my 17-year-old sister Cassie. She was sobbing dramatically, her face red and streaked with tears. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, looking between them in confusion. Dad spun around to face me, his eyes blazing with fury I'd never seen before. "Don't you dare lie to us." Cassie pointed a shaking finger at me. "She took it. I saw her going through my room yesterday when I came home from school." "Took what?" I asked, my heart starting to race. "My graduation money," Cassie wailed. "Grandma's $500. It was in my jewelry box, and now it's gone." I stared at my sister in shock. I hadn't been anywhere near her room, and I certainly hadn't taken any money. The accusation felt like a slap across the face. "I didn't take anything," I said firmly. But looking at my parents' faces, I could see they'd already made up their minds. "Don't lie to our faces," Dad shouted, stepping closer to me. His voice was so loud it made me flinch. "We know you took it." Mom crossed her arms and glared at me with disgust. "How could you steal from your own sister? From your own family?" "I didn't steal anything," I protested, my voice rising with panic. "I would never." "Liar," Cassie screamed through her tears. "I trusted you. I thought you were different, but you're just a thief." The word thief hit me like a physical blow. My own family was calling me a criminal over money I'd never even seen. "You're a disgrace," Mom said coldly. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" Dad's face was red with rage. "Pack your things and get out. Now." "What?" I whispered, sure I'd misheard. "You heard him," Mom snapped. "We won't have a thief living under our roof." I looked desperately at Cassie, hoping she would tell the truth, admit this was some kind of misunderstanding. But she just stood there behind our parents, and for just a second, I caught something in her expression that made my blood run cold. Behind those tears, behind that devastated act, she was smirking. My own sister had set me up, and she was enjoying watching my world collapse. "Please," I begged, my voice breaking. "Just let me explain. Check my room, look through my things. I don't have the money because I didn't take it." But Dad was already heading toward the stairs. "You have 30 minutes to pack whatever you can carry and get out of this house." "Mom, please," I turned to her desperately. "You've known me my whole life. Do you really think I would steal from Cassie?" Mom's eyes were cold as ice. "I know what I see. Your sister is devastated, and you're still lying to our faces." Tears started streaming down my cheeks. "I'm not lying. I swear on my life, I didn't take that money." "Stop it," Cassie shouted. "Stop pretending to be innocent. I saw you in my room. I saw you going through my jewelry box." The lie came so easily from her lips, so convincingly, that for a moment I almost doubted my own memory. "That never happened," I whispered. Mom stepped closer to me, her face twisted with disappointment and anger. "You're dead to this family," she said quietly. "You're no daughter of mine." Those words hit me like a knife to the chest. The woman who had raised me, who had kissed my scraped knees and celebrated my achievements, had just disowned me over a lie. I looked one more time at Cassie, hoping for some sign of remorse, some indication that she would tell the truth. But she just stared back at me with those cold, satisfied eyes. 30 minutes later, I stood on the front porch with a single duffel bag containing everything I could fit from my life. My childhood bedroom, my books, my photos, my memories, all of it was locked behind a door I was no longer allowed to walk through. Dad handed me $50, money I'd given him just last week from my paycheck for groceries. "This should get you through a few days," he said without looking at me. "After that, you're on your own." "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked, my voice hollow. "That's not our problem anymore," Mom said from the doorway. I wanted to beg again, to plead with them to reconsider, to give me a chance to prove my innocence. But I could see it would be useless. They had made their choice. As I walked down the street with my bag over my shoulder, I heard the front door slam behind me. The sound echoed in my chest like the final nail in a coffin. I made it 3 blocks before I collapsed on a bus stop bench and cried until I couldn't breathe. The sobs came from somewhere deep inside me, from a place where my heart used to be. People walked past, some staring, some pretending not to see the broken girl falling apart in public. Night fell around me, and I realized I had nowhere to go. The next few months were the hardest of my life. I slept on friends' couches when I could, in homeless shelters when I had to, and sometimes just in 24-hour diners nursing a single cup of coffee until morning. I took whatever work I could find, cleaning offices at night, washing dishes at restaurants, babysitting for people who paid cash. Every dollar went toward survival: cheap food, bus fare, occasional nights in dingy motels when sleeping rough became too dangerous. My college savings account, the one I'd been building for 2 years, became my lifeline. But watching those numbers shrink every week felt like watching my future disappear. I applied for dozens of jobs, but without a permanent address or nice clothes for interviews, most employers wouldn't even consider me. The worst part wasn't the hunger or the exhaustion or the constant fear. It was the loneliness. I had lost my family, my home, my sense of belonging in the world. Every night, I fell asleep wondering if my parents ever thought about me, if they ever questioned whether they'd made a mistake. But then I would remember Cassie's smile, that moment of satisfaction I'd seen in her eyes, and I knew the truth. She had destroyed my life on purpose, and she was probably sleeping peacefully in her warm bed while I struggled to survive. That thought kept me going when everything else failed. After 6 months of barely surviving, I finally caught a break. A small apartment complex on the edge of town had a superintendent who took pity on me. "Look," he said, scratching his gray beard as he looked at my application. "I can see you're going through something. You seem like a good kid who's had some bad luck." I held my breath, waiting for the rejection I'd grown used to. "There's a studio apartment in the basement. It's small, and it's not pretty, but it's clean and safe. You can have it for $200 a month if you help with maintenance around the building." I almost cried with relief. "Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much." The apartment was tiny, just one room with a kitchenette and a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. But it had a door with a lock, and it was mine. That first night, lying on an air mattress on the floor, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. I had a roof over my head. I had an address. I could start building something real again. As I stared at the ceiling, I made myself a promise. I would never be this vulnerable again. I would never let anyone have the power to destroy my life with a lie. I would build something so strong that no one could ever take it away from me. With a stable place to live, I could finally focus on more than just survival. I kept my day job at a local diner, but in the evenings, I started teaching myself skills that could lead to something better. I found free computer classes at the library and discovered I had a natural talent for numbers and organization. I started learning about bookkeeping, accounting, and small business management. The work came easily to me. There was something satisfying about making numbers line up perfectly, about bringing order to chaos. Maybe it was because my own life had been so chaotic that I craved the certainty of balanced books. After a few months of study, I got my first client, the owner of the diner where I worked. His books were a mess, receipts stuffed into shoeboxes, invoices lost in piles of paper. "I hate this stuff," he admitted. "If you can make sense of it, I'll pay you $50 a week." I spent my evenings transforming his financial chaos into organized spreadsheets and filing systems. The work was tedious, but I loved it. Every number in its place, every transaction accounted for, everything balanced and perfect. Word spread slowly. The diner owner recommended me to his brother, who owned a small construction company. The construction company owner told his neighbor, who ran a flower shop. My evening side business started to grow. As my bookkeeping business expanded, I found fuel for my ambition in an unexpected place: my anger. Every time I wanted to give up, every time the work felt too hard or the hours too long, I would think about Cassie. I pictured her in her comfortable bedroom, probably asking our parents for spending money, maybe even joking about how easily she had gotten rid of me. That image would fill me with rage so pure it felt like electricity in my veins. She had tried to destroy me, and for a while, she had succeeded. But I was still here. I was still fighting. And every small success I achieved was proof that her lie hadn't won. I started working 12-hour days, 8 hours at the diner, for hours on bookkeeping. I lived on coffee and determination, saving every penny I could. My studio apartment was still sparse, but it was clean and organized. I had a desk now, a real computer, file cabinets for my clients' paperwork. It wasn't much, but it was mine, earned through my own hard work. Some nights, I would sit at my desk doing bookkeeping and imagine what Cassie would think if she could see me now. Would she be surprised that I'd survived? Would she feel even a moment of guilt for what she'd done? Probably not. But that was okay. Her opinion didn't matter anymore. What mattered was proving to myself that I was stronger than her lies. 3 years passed. My bookkeeping side business had grown into something real. A legitimate company with 23 regular clients and a waiting list of small businesses who wanted my services. I had moved into a proper one-bedroom apartment in a better neighborhood. I had a car, a savings account, and for the first time since being kicked out, I felt financially secure. The best part? None of my success had anything to do with my family. I hadn't gotten help from connections or borrowed money from relatives. Every client I gained, every dollar I earned, came from my own skills and hard work. I had built a life they knew nothing about. Sometimes I wondered if they ever thought about me. Did Mom ever regret her harsh words? Did Dad ever question whether they'd made a mistake? Did Cassie ever feel guilty for destroying her own sister's life over a lie? But those thoughts came less and less often. I had learned to channel my energy into building something positive instead of dwelling on past hurt. My clients trusted me with their most sensitive financial information. They relied on me to keep their businesses organized and profitable. I had become someone people respected and depended on. The scared, homeless teenager who had cried at a bus stop felt like a different person entirely. That girl had been broken by betrayal. On a Tuesday morning in April, something arrived in my mailbox that stopped me cold. It was a wedding invitation, printed on expensive cardstock with gold embossing. Elegant script announced the upcoming marriage of Cassie Marie to Brandon James. I stood in my apartment hallway, staring at my sister's name, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. After 4 years of silence, this was how she chose to contact me? Not with an apology or an explanation, but with an invitation to celebrate her happiness while my absence from the family had never been acknowledged. The audacity was breathtaking. I almost threw it in the trash immediately. What kind of twisted game was she playing? Did she really expect me to show up and play the role of supportive sister after what she'd done? But something made me look at it more carefully. The groom's name seemed familiar, though I couldn't place it immediately. Brandon James. Brandon James. And then it hit me like a lightning bolt. Brandon James was one of my clients. He owned a small marketing firm that I'd been doing books for about 6 months. A charming guy in his early 30s who always paid on time and sent thank you notes with his checks. My sister was marrying one of my clients, and she had no idea. If you're hooked on this story of family betrayal and revenge, make sure to subscribe for more incredible tales like this one. I sat down at my kitchen table and really looked at the invitation for the first time. The wedding was planned for the Riverside Country Club, the most expensive venue in our hometown. The reception would feature a full dinner and open bar. Everything about it screamed money. Brandon James, my client, had never struck me as wealthy. His marketing firm was small, only a handful of employees, and while he was successful, he wasn't what I would call rich. Maybe Cassie had money of her own, or maybe our parents were funding the wedding. But something about the extravagance didn't add up with what I knew about Brandon's finances. I pulled out his client file and started reviewing his recent financial statements. What I found made me frown. His business income had been declining over the past few months. Nothing dramatic, but a steady downward trend that should have made him more cautious about spending, not more extravagant. I flipped through more documents, looking for anything that might explain how he could afford such an expensive wedding. And that's when I found the first red flag. A credit card statement I'd never seen before, hidden in the middle of a stack of business receipts. The balance was over $15,000, and it was 3 months behind on payments. This wasn't a business expense. This was personal debt, and Brandon had never mentioned it to me. I felt my bookkeeper instincts kicking in. Something wasn't right here. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd found. As Brandon's bookkeeper, I was supposed to have a complete picture of his financial situation. The hidden credit card bothered me professionally. But personally, I was wrestling with a bigger question. Did I care if my sister was about to marry someone who might be hiding financial problems? Part of me, the part that still carried the hurt from 4 years ago, thought she deserved whatever she got. If Brandon was lying about money, maybe Cassie would learn what it felt like to be betrayed by someone she trusted. But another part of me, the part that remembered loving my little sister before she destroyed my life, felt obligated to make sure she knew the truth before making the biggest decision of her life. I decided to dig a little deeper. If Brandon was hiding one credit card, there might be more. Using the financial information I had access to as his bookkeeper, I started tracing patterns in his spending. Late payments here, cash advances there, mysterious transfers between accounts. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Brandon wasn't just hiding some credit card debt. He was drowning in it. Multiple cards, all maxed out, all behind on payments. Personal loans, business loans used for personal expenses, even money borrowed against his company's equipment. The man my sister was about to marry was financially ruined, and he was using their relationship to maintain the illusion that everything was fine. I spent a sleepless night staring at the ceiling, wrestling with what to do. Did I owe Cassie the truth? After what she'd done to me, after the way our family had thrown me away without a second thought, did I have any obligation to protect her from making a terrible mistake? The rational part of me said no. She had lied and gotten me disowned. She had watched me get kicked out of our family home and never said a word. Whatever happened to her now was karma, not my responsibility. But there was another voice in my head, quieter but persistent. It sounded like the woman I'd become over the past 4 years, someone who valued truth and honesty, someone who had built her reputation on integrity. If I let Cassie marry Brandon without knowing the truth about his finances, was I any better than she was? Was I letting her cruelty turn me into someone cruel too? I thought about all the clients who trusted me with their financial secrets. They relied on me to be honest, to tell them uncomfortable truths when necessary, to help them make informed decisions. Didn't my own sister deserve the same honesty, even if she'd never given it to me? By morning, I had made my decision. I wasn't going to tell Cassie the truth to save her. I was going to tell everyone the truth to save myself, to prove that I was better than the lies that had defined my family for too long. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing. If I was going to expose Brandon's financial deception, I needed to do it right. I needed documentation that no one could dismiss or explain away. I compiled every piece of evidence I had access to as his bookkeeper. Credit card statements, loan documents, late payment notices, overdraft fees, cash advances, everything that painted the picture of a man living far beyond his means. But I also did something else. I started investigating the theft that had gotten me disowned 4 years ago. I reached out to my old employer at the grocery store and asked for copies of my time cards from that week. I got statements from my bank showing my account balance and transaction history. I even found security camera footage from the store that showed me working during the exact time Cassie claimed I was stealing from her. I had never bothered to gather this evidence before because I was too hurt and shocked to think clearly. But now, with 4 years of distance and professional experience, I knew how to build an airtight case. The truth was simple. I had been at work when the money disappeared. Security footage, time cards, and witness statements all proved I couldn't have been in Cassie's room. Which meant either someone else had taken the money, or it had never been stolen at all. Either way, Cassie had lied. Now I just needed the perfect opportunity to reveal everything. The day of Cassie's wedding arrived with perfect spring weather. I put on my best dress, a simple but elegant navy blue that I'd bought for client meetings, and drove to the Riverside Country Club. My hands shook as I walked up the steps to the venue. I hadn't seen my family in 4 years, and I had no idea how they would react to my presence. The moment I stepped into the lobby, conversations stopped. People turned to stare, whispering to each other behind their hands. I recognized. Their stares felt like physical weight, but I kept my head high and walked toward the chapel where the ceremony would take place. That's when I saw them. Mom stood near the entrance, greeting guests in a powder blue dress that probably cost more than I used to make in a month. Dad was beside her in a crisp black suit, looking older but still stern. When Mom's eyes met mine, her face went white. She grabbed Dad's arm and whispered something urgent in his ear. Dad turned, saw me, and his expression darkened with the same anger I remembered from that terrible night 4 years ago. But I wasn't the same frightened 19-year-old they'd thrown out anymore. I was a successful businesswoman who had survived their abandonment and built something beautiful from the wreckage. I smiled politely and walked past them into the chapel. I took a seat in the back row, trying to blend in with the crowd of wedding guests. But I could feel eyes on me, whispers following in my wake. Mom appeared at the end of my row just as the wedding music began to play. "How dare you show up here?" she hissed under her breath, leaning close so other guests wouldn't hear. "I was invited," I replied calmly, showing her the invitation. Her face twisted with disgust. "You have no right to be here. Not after what you did." "What I did?" I kept my voice level, but inside I was marveling at her audacity. I was falsely accused and thrown out of my own home. What exactly did I do wrong? "You know what you did," she snapped. Before I could respond, the wedding march began and everyone stood as Cassie appeared at the back of the chapel. My sister looked beautiful in an elaborate white gown that probably cost thousands of dollars. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She glowed with happiness as she walked down the aisle toward Brandon. For a moment, looking at her radiant face, I almost felt bad about what I was going to do. But then I remembered her smile from that night 4 years ago. I remembered the satisfaction in her eyes as she watched our parents destroy my life with her lies. The time for protecting her from consequences was over. The ceremony proceeded normally at first. Brandon and Cassie exchanged vows that spoke of trust, honesty, and building a life together. The irony was almost unbearable. I sat quietly in my back row seat, the folder of financial documents on my lap, waiting for the right moment. The pastor smiled at the congregation and began the traditional words I'd heard in dozens of movies and TV shows. "If anyone here has reason why these two should not be joined in marriage, let them speak now or forever hold their peace." The chapel fell into perfect silence. This was usually just a formality, a tradition no one expected to be interrupted. But I stood up. The sound of my movement seemed impossibly loud in the quiet space. Heads turned, gasps echoed through the room. Cassie's face went pale as she saw me rising from my seat. "Yes," I said clearly, my voice carrying through the chapel without wavering. "I do." The silence that followed was deafening. Brandon looked confused, turning to see who had spoken. Cassie's bouquet trembled in her hands. Dad started to rise from his front row seat, probably to have me thrown out, but the pastor raised his hand. "This is highly unusual," the pastor said, looking uncertain. "But if someone has legitimate concerns about this union, they should be heard. What is your objection?" I took a deep breath and stepped into the aisle. It was time for the truth to finally come out. "My objection," I said clearly, walking toward the front of the chapel, "is that the groom has been deceiving everyone, including his bride, about his financial situation." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Brandon's face went from confusion to panic as he recognized me. "Who are you?" Cassie demanded, though I could see in her eyes that she knew exactly who I was. "I'm your sister," I said simply. "And I'm also Brandon's bookkeeper." The gasps from the congregation were audible now. Our parents looked like they'd seen a ghost. I opened the folder I'd been carrying and pulled out the first document. Brandon James is not the successful businessman he's pretended to be. He's drowning in debt, over $200,000 in credit cards, personal loans, and business loans that he's used for personal expenses. "That's not true," Brandon protested, but his voice lacked conviction. I held up a credit card statement. "This card alone has a balance of $37,000 and is 4 months behind on payments. There are 7 more just like it." The pastor looked between Brandon and me, clearly unsure how to handle this unprecedented situation. "These are private business documents," Brandon said desperately. She's violating confidentiality agreements. Actually, I replied calmly, as your bookkeeper, I have a legal obligation to report financial fraud when I see it. And using business loans for personal expenses, which you've done repeatedly, constitutes fraud. The silence in the chapel was complete now. Everyone was staring at the documents in my hands, trying to process what was happening. Chaos erupted. Brandon's face was red with anger and humiliation. You can't do this. You can't ruin my wedding over business disputes. This isn't a dispute, I said firmly. These are facts. Documented facts that show you've been lying to everyone, including your bride. Guests were standing now, talking loudly among themselves. Some were pulling out phones, probably to record what was becoming the most dramatic wedding anyone had ever witnessed. Cassie finally found her voice. Get out, she screamed at me. Get out of my wedding. Not until everyone knows the truth, I replied. I turned to address the congregation directly. Cassie is about to legally bind herself to a man who owes more money than most people make in 5 years. A man who has been hiding his financial ruin behind a facade of success. She's lying, Cassie shrieked. She's always been a liar. She's just jealous that I'm happy. The word liar hung in the air like a sword. Dad stepped forward, his face purple with rage. That's enough. You destroyed this family once with your lies and theft. I won't let you destroy your sister's happiness too. Actually, I said, pulling out another folder, let's talk about lies and theft. The room fell silent again. Even Cassie stopped screaming. For years ago, I was accused of stealing $500 from Cassie's room. I was thrown out of my family and disowned based on that accusation. I held up a security camera still photo. This is footage from the grocery store where I worked, showing me at my register at the exact time Cassie claimed I was in her room stealing money. The explosion of voices was immediate and overwhelming. What? Mom gasped, staring at the photo. That's impossible. Dad protested, but his voice wavered with uncertainty. Brandon tried to use the chaos to escape, pushing past guests toward the exit, but 2 of his groomsmen blocked his path. But the most dramatic reaction came from Cassie herself. You deserved what happened to you, she screamed, her face twisted with rage and panic. You were always their favorite. You were perfect at everything. You deserved to lose it all. The chapel went dead silent. Those words hung in the air like a confession. Everyone turned to stare at Cassie, who realized too late what she'd just revealed. Cassie, Mom whispered, her face going pale. What are you saying? I didn't mean. Cassie stammered, but it was too late. You framed me, I said quietly. You lied to our parents and got me disowned because you were jealous. Cassie, Dad's voice was barely a whisper. Tell me that's not true. But Cassie couldn't speak. She stood there in her expensive wedding dress, bouquet still in her trembling hands, caught in the lie that had destroyed her sister's life. The truth was finally out, and there was no taking it back. The wedding guests were in complete chaos now. Some were leaving, unwilling to be part of such a dramatic scene. Others were staying to watch the family drama unfold. Brandon made another attempt to leave, but I called out to him. Before you go, I said loudly enough for everyone to hear, you should know that your creditors have been calling my office. They're planning to garnish your business accounts next week. He stopped in his tracks, defeated. Mom and Dad were staring at Cassie with expressions I'd never seen before. A mixture of horror, disappointment, and growing understanding. The money was never stolen, was it? Mom asked quietly. Cassie's silence was answer enough. You destroyed your own sister's life over jealousy? Dad's voice was hollow with disbelief. She had everything. Cassie finally exploded. Good grades, college plans, your respect. She was perfect and I was just ordinary. So you framed her for theft? Mom's voice was rising now. You let us throw our own daughter out on the street over a lie? The bouquet fell from Cassie's hands, scattering white roses across the chapel floor. I didn't think you'd actually kick her out, Cassie said weakly. I thought you'd just ground her or something. I didn't mean for it to go that far. But no one was buying her excuses anymore. The truth was clear, and it was ugly. For years too late, my parents finally saw their golden child for who she really was. I looked at my parents, at Cassie in her ruined wedding dress, at the chaos surrounding us, and felt something unexpected. Peace. For 4 years, I had carried the weight of their rejection, the pain of being called a thief by my own family. I had built my life around proving that I was better than their accusations. Now, standing in front of everyone who had ever doubted me, I finally had what I'd always wanted: vindication. But it felt different than I'd imagined. I wasn't triumphant or vengeful. I was just done. "Cassie," I said quietly, and the room fell silent to hear what I would say to the sister who had destroyed my life. She looked up at me with tears streaming down her face, her perfect makeup ruined. "You lied and got me disowned," I said simply. "You watched our parents throw me out of my home and never said a word. You let me struggle and suffer for years because you were jealous." She opened her mouth, probably to apologize or make excuses, but I held up my hand. "But you know what? I'm grateful." The shocked silence was complete now. "I'm grateful because your life forced me to become someone stronger than I ever would have been living in this family's shadow. I built a successful business from nothing. I learned what I was really made of. I discovered that I don't need people who could abandon me so easily." I looked at my parents, who were staring at me with expressions I couldn't read. "I don't need this family anymore," I said calmly. I turned to leave, but Dad's voice stopped me. "Wait," he said, his voice cracking. "Please. We made a terrible mistake." I turned back to face him. The anger and disappointment that had defined his expression 4 years ago were gone, replaced by something that looked like grief. "We failed you," Mom whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Our own daughter, and we failed you completely." "Yes," I said simply. "You did. Can you ever forgive us?" Dad asked. I considered the question seriously. Could I forgive them for throwing me away over a lie? For choosing to believe the worst about me without any evidence? For 4 years of silence while I rebuilt my life from nothing? "Maybe someday," I said finally. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. And it doesn't mean pretending that what happened didn't fundamentally change who we are to each other. I looked at Cassie one last time. She was sitting in the front pew now, her wedding dress pulled around her, crying into her hands. "You wanted to destroy me," I told her. "But all you did was set me free." I picked up my folder of documents and walked toward the chapel exit. Behind me, I could hear the continued chaos: guests leaving, family members arguing, the sound of a wedding completely falling apart. But for the first time in 4 years, none of it was my problem. I got in my car and drove away from the wreckage of Cassie's wedding, away from the family that had thrown me away, away from the pain that had defined the last 4 years of my life. Mom and Dad had tried to contact me several times, but I wasn't ready for that conversation. Maybe someday I would be, but not yet. The girl who had been disowned for a crime she didn't commit was gone forever. In her place was a woman who had learned that the family you choose can be more loyal than the family you're born into. A woman who had built something beautiful from the ruins of betrayal. I wasn't their victim anymore. I wasn't their daughter anymore either. I was just me, successful, independent, and finally free from the lies that had once defined my life. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destroying your enemies. Sometimes it's simply outgrowing the need for their approval. If this story of family betrayal turned to triumph inspired you, make sure to subscribe and share it with anyone who's ever been cast out for something they didn't do. Sometimes the people who abandon us do us the greatest favor of our lives. They force us to discover just how strong we really are. The sweetest revenge is simply living well without them. Thanks for watching.